We have to go. Just before we came live here, the president of the United States and the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, had a press conference in Italy where it was announced that the United States has now signed a bilateral security guarantee for Ukraine. It's hard for me to even imagine that the United States is going to tie itself in any kind of a security agreement, a written agreement with Ukraine in the condition that it's in now and the risks that we're taking. But that's where we are. And we're going to break this down with somebody who knows the situation really, really well. And that is Larry Johnson, former CIA intelligence officer, and just an incredibly knowledgeable guy. Just got back from Russia not too long ago, so he may have some insights into what people are thinking on that side of the equation, because unlike what the mainstream media is going to do, and certainly the president of the United States, we're talking all sides of this equation, not just one side. Larry, right. First of all, just welcome back to the show. Grateful to have you here.
Thank you, Danny. Great to be with you.
Well, listen, I like I asked you before we got on the air here, I asked you if you had seen that press conference, and your face, even without saying a word, told me a whole lot. That something like, I think you said it was very painful or something to watch. What were your thoughts when you were watching that? No, delusional was the word you used.
Yeah. I said it was so painful you'd actually rather be waterboarded than having to watch that.
It was just wow.
Divorced. This kind of divorce from reality. I mean, it's surreal. So here you have Volodymyr Zelensky, who is no longer the elected president of Ukraine. He is only in that office by his own declaration because his term ended. He canceled elections. He banned opposition political parties. He shut down opposition media. And he's being celebrated as the image of democracy. And people sit there and nod their heads. This is like that old fable, the king with no clothes. Yeah. And so here's Zelensky running around naked, and everybody's saying, "Oh my God, what a marvelous clothes he has on." So, but it's complete. It's shameless. And then the United States committing to 10 years, we've got this long-term commitment to Ukraine. Except, we really don't have any Patriot missile batteries to send you now because we can't make them. And those 155 millimeter artillery shells, we're out of those too. Just bear with us 2 or 3 years. Just as long as the Russians stop, you'll be okay.
Yeah.
And it's like, the one factor in this they're not taking into consideration is what the Russians are doing on the battlefield every single day. And it's the Russians aren't going to stop because their attitude is, it doesn't matter what these people say. They can indulge with their own fantasies about the mythic, these agreements that are never going to be fulfilled, and about, Zelensky supposedly staying in power and government. There's a big reason he's out traveling around in other countries, because if he stayed in-house in Kiev, it's very likely he'd be taken out in a military coup. They're already word out that Zelensky's coming back. So this, we're only seeing the start of the mayhem.
Yeah, that's kind of what I fear, and that's the issue on that the whole democracy port, and the fact that he canceled these elections. Now he claimed, and certainly the United States publicly agreed that they're in a time of war, so you can't have an election. So they have martial law, so that's going to continue to operate. But now you see they're signing this 10-year agreement, so they plan on going long term. So the question is, how long do you think he's going to go in? Because no one's even talking aspirationally how long that he's going to be before they expect some kind of negotiation or elections, which sounds to me pretty autocratic.
Yeah, it would be one thing if the United States warehouses, where we stockpile military weapons and equipment, were filled to the brim, that they're just overflowing, and man, we had so much surplus, and our factories are churning it out every day at an incredible rate. But that's not the case. It's exactly the opposite. We've given almost everything we have to give, and there's nothing left. We're going around begging other countries to give up, like with Poland. Hey, can you give the Ukrainians the Patriot missiles? And the Poles just said yesterday, no and hell no. We're not doing it. We need it for ourselves. So,
You know, I may be jumping ahead of myself a little bit here, but since you brought that topic up, I thought it was interesting. In the question and answer portion, after they both given the Zelensky and Biden had both given their statements, Zelensky was specifically asked about air defense capacity, and then Biden was also asked how many they had, and they said, well, we've got 5 that we're going to give you right away, and then we're going to have some more, a couple more, I think 7 that they're going to try to get. What no one mentioned in there and didn't get hardly any press at all in the Western media is that last week you had a NATO official admit that we had 5% of the air defense assets on our eastern flank that we need. And if we've only got 5%, where is any more going to come from to give to Ukraine?
yeah. Yeah, because, go back and look at when the Patriot missile system was built, they built 1,500 launchers. So it's not like the factory's in place still building them, still churning them out. They're not. And then they also built I think it was like 15, 16,000, maybe 20,000 of the actual missiles that go into the systems. And they've continued to produce. Last figure I saw was 500 a year.
Yeah.
So
right.
It is the disconnect from reality. As you know, when you've got an armored column moving out in the desert, the gas doesn't fall from heaven. God doesn't come in. It's not like manna. You don't wake up every morning and there's a bucket of gas next to your tank. Okay?
There wasn't.
It's brought out there by trucks, or you've got fuel bladders that are dropped out, but there's a whole logistics chain in place that ensures that you can sustain operations. Not to mention you guys need food and ammunition for the tanks as well as any sidearms. Well, the logistics chain is broken down right now with respect to what the United States and NATO can supply. It is like that neighborhood garage sale, and everybody's got different crap out on the streets, and they're just giving it away. That's what Ukraine's getting. They're not getting something that's standardized, and they're getting. You get 5 or 6 different systems. Well, that's 5 or 6 different systems you need to maintain, which means 5 or 6 different parts that you need to maintain, which means you got to have a mechanic or multiple mechanics that can handle 5 to 6. So it just goes on and on and on. And these guys then are talking the big picture. Oh, yeah, we're going to support you for 10 years. Yeah. I guarantee you this. Ukraine, as it exists now, will not be around in 10 years. I don't think they'll be around in 1 year.
Yeah, I think that there's a higher chance of that than what the administration's trying to tell us. But let me not go too much further down, because I want some people to understand why what you and I are both saying is delusion and just not based on reality. Let me specifically show why based on what was just said. So first of all, this is something that Zelensky has been begging for literally months. Here he was back in April, emphatically saying what he's looking for.
Our teams, Ukraine and the United States, are currently working on a bilateral security agreement, and we are already working on a specific text. We are discussing the specific foundations of our security and cooperation. We are also working on fixing specific levels of support for this year and for the next 10 years.
So he's been looking for 10 years, so he obviously has no intention of running for re-election anytime soon, because he's going to say they're in the wartime situation is going to continue on, so they're not going to have it. But then today, when Biden finally announced it, and first of all, it was like, why did this take 2 months to do if it's something fairly straightforward? You already had the text back then, but we'll talk about that in a second. But here's what Biden was saying. A lot of bumper stickers here, but here he goes.
We've taken 3 major steps at the G7 that collectively show Putin we cannot wait us out. He cannot divide us. And we'll be with Ukraine until they prevail in this war. The United States, the G7, and countries around the world have consistently answered the question by saying, yes, we will. We will say it again. Yes, again and again and again. We're going to stand with Ukraine.
We're going to stand with Ukraine. Yes, yes, yes.
No.
Wait a minute. What do you do? He said in there, and Zelensky repeated later, I'll get to that in a minute. He said, we're going to stay with you until you prevail. Where is the plan to prevail anywhere in what I've seen so far?
Yeah, it doesn't exist. When the claim, we're going to stay with you until the end. It sort of sounds like those relatives that come to visit you from out of town and they don't pay for their food and they don't clean up after themselves and you can't wait for them to leave. That's what the West has become. The West is not bringing new supplies of whether it's the artillery pieces, which are being destroyed and not easily replaced, the tanks, the Bradley fighting vehicles, the Leopard tanks, the Challenger tanks, the 155 millimeter shells that go into the howitzers. And then on top of it, the air defense systems that have been supplied have been destroyed, which is why Ukraine right now has no effective air defense system. And despite their claims that, we're shooting things down right and left, it's not happening. And what's taking place on the battlefield, the Russians are moving forward. The flaw in what Biden said is that Putin can't wait us out. Putin's not waiting. He's not sitting back going, oh my God, what's NATO and the G7 going to do? No, he's moving forward. The Russians have a plan. They're following their plan. They're exercising prudence. They are not being driven into launching mass wave attacks out of panic. They are not panicked. They are, in fact, very methodically tearing apart the Ukrainian army and in the process, disarming NATO. Because despite Biden's claim about, we're all in this together, Turkey's already said, nope, we're not playing. You want to go in to attack Russia? Count us out. Hungary, ditto. We're not. That's not our thing. Yeah. So
Slovakia, add that to the list.
So you got Finland and Sweden. Oh boy, they're with Turkey, you're looking at the second largest army in NATO. That's significant. With Finland and Sweden, they might fill up a regiment within the Turkish army, but that's about it.
Yeah, and then you got Hungary right there, pretty much on the eastern flank, and they're out. Slovakia's out. So where's all this unity we have? But let me look at some of the specific things that Biden said, and I'd like to get your reaction to some of them. So he said, first of all, that this is going to strengthen the credibility of Ukraine for the long term, that 10-year period here. He specified right up front, he said, okay, no American troops. I want to make sure everybody's clear on that. So we're not going to do the one thing on the ground that actually could make a difference. Thank God, because that would be catastrophe and disaster. But it doesn't get much better than that, because what he did say, we're going to give them ammunition, training, intelligence support, and we're going to help build their industrial base. But what he didn't say, he didn't say anything about how much money, where's the money coming from? Is there going to be more of these $61 billion packages that Congress is supposed to pass? How many years of this? If you're talking long term, how many years do you expect Congress to keep passing this stuff when you saw it took 6 months to get the last one, and there's no guarantee there will be another one?
Right. Well, and within that, when he talks about rebuilding the industrial base in Ukraine, but somebody needs to brief Biden on the fact that right now, Russia has taken out, I think it's effectively 85% of Ukraine's ability to generate electricity through thermal power plants, coal-fired power plants, hydroelectric power plants. So what are those factories going to run on? Because already several, Kiev, Lviv, Kharkiv, they're going without power at least 6 to 7 hours a day. Secondly, the Russians have demonstrated that any factory that has been set up and to produce war material, they're hitting with Iskander missiles and others, destroying them. And so there is not a factory that's really intact in Ukraine today that's churning out military equipment, like whether it's ammunition or for artillery or it's ammunition for rifles, as well as weapons. And so that's why I said this is the fantasy. They're moving pieces about on paper that are not reflected in reality. And so what, they're going to launch a few shells across the border if that's the U.S. rules of engagement. Okay, what does that achieve militarily? Does it destroy Russian military units? Well, no. Does it destroy Russian ability to move supplies to the front? No. Does it destroy Russian manufacturing of tanks, artillery pieces, ammunition? No. So
And in fact,
what?
here's a clip from John Kirby explaining the limitation on those rules of engagement, so that all those targets, which would ordinarily be prime targets, are off limits. Check this out.
Right now, there's no change in our policy about the use of ATACMS, a long-range strike missile of 300 kilometers or so, for use inside Russia. And again, I want to remind, the guidance we've given the Ukrainians is to go after things that are an imminent threat just over that border. Again, will we have to talk to them about what that looks like going forward? Probably so, but that's the guidance they've been given right now.
And so you see all those targets that you just mentioned are off limits, at least for our stuff. Now, Ukraine can and has been using their own assets, and they've been making a few painful strikes to Russia. But as you pointed out, it has no strategic impact at all. Yeah. It probably doesn't even have any tactical impact. It's just kind of flashy.
Right. And you know, on top of it, when they talk, even with the range of the ATACMS, there is a limited number of ATACMS. Every one they fire off that's then countered by a Russian air defense is one last one in the inventory. So it's not like they've got an unlimited supply sitting back behind the lines and stored in Germany or in Poland that they can readily call upon. In fact, as they use these up, they become less equipped. They're being, and that's the Russian strategy. This war of attrition is to deplete the ability of the Ukrainians to fight. And in the process, what the Russians discovered serendipitously is that they are actually depleting NATO reserves. I don't think that they had actually anticipated that in the original plan, but it is like it became readily apparent that, holy smokes, these guys really do not have the factories in place to build this stuff up.
Either that or they never imagined that we would do something foolish and actually start to dwindle our war stocks where we don't have the capacity to replace them in scale, and that we're just foolishly weakening ourselves. I didn't think that we would do that. I thought that when it got clear that, especially last summer, I really thought when the Ukraine offensive was an abysmal failure and broke its teeth on the first line of defense, that the NATO side would say, okay, we're not going to keep throwing our good money away after bad. It's time to bring this to a close. And instead, the coffers have stayed open, even though it's literally like just emptying out your warehouses for no gain.
Well, and what compounds it, Danny, is the war with Israel and the Palestinians in Gaza. So that's also depleting U.S. stores, number one. And then in Indo-PACOM, in that AOR, you've got now the Indo-PACOM commander requesting assets and requesting supplies because they are prepping to go to war with China. You know, they said as much. So you've got this competition, and it's not like we've got an unlimited pool. It's a defined pool, and so it's been used up. It's shrinking, and it'd be one thing if we had the industrial base in place to replace that, but we don't. This is not like World War II, where you had all these idle factories as a result of the Great Depression. And man, all this money coming in from the federal government just energized them. And all of a sudden you're producing aircraft carriers, destroyers, tanks, B-17 bombers and fighters. And it was unbelievable what the United States was able to produce. We're not there anymore.
Yeah. And there's no plan to get there other than bumper stickers. Yeah. Which is another problem. So one of the other things that the objectives that Biden said is that this package, which again was not quantified, so I don't know how big it is. I don't know where he thinks the money's going to come from, because beyond the $61 billion, Congress has to approve and appropriate money. So he can't just write a check. But he said it's going to make the Ukrainian armed forces strong, sustainable, and resilient for the long term, but no plan or explanation of how. Yeah.
Well, and Ukraine is still struggling with the recruiting process desperately. I mean, every day is new videos of them out.
Oh, yeah. They've been really starting to come in large numbers now. Those videos are horrible to watch.
And then you've also seen the video of the old guys. I mean, it looks like pictures of you and me decked out in combat gear standing out there.
Yeah.
And it's no smite on you and me, but hey, we've passed that 60
Right.
years
You
mark.
don't want me to be the first line of defense.
Yeah, we got stuff hurting that we never knew hurt 40 years ago.
Right.
So, and you put guys like that out in a trench, and they're exposed to the elements, and then they're tasked with having to lift ammo cans and move heavy weapons, and it's just like, they physically can't sustain it, and that
While under fire and drone threat hourly.
Right.
Here's one of the other things I found very curious about Biden's comments. One of the things he said this package is going to do, again, it's a huge list of things. He said they were going to rebuild the energy system. To your comment a minute ago that there's only a few hours a day of energy right now. But what he didn't say is how. I mean, it's almost like the same thing with the factories. He said we're going to rebuild their ability to make ammunition, so eventually they'll be able to produce all their own. They won't need it from us, which would be years into the future with no war. But the same thing on the energy situation. Russia's still taking them out. They had another one this past weekend, and one can only assume that that's going to continue on until eventually at some point they don't even have the ability to make energy. How are you going to bring another capacity in? How are you going to bring an industrial capacity in when you have no air defense and Russia can take it out before it's even constructed?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what. In fact, you saw that even with some of the construction crews that were designated to create defensive positions up in the north around Kharkiv, that they were being attacked by the Russians. The bulldozers and front, the different machines that were being used to dig trenches, they're being blown up. So it's not like they've got a safe, secure environment. In contrast, what the Russians have, and like what the Soviets had in World War II, they were able to move their factories back behind the Ural Mountains. So distance-wise, in World War II, the Germans didn't have any aircraft that could reach that far and destroy those factories. And tell you what, those factories are still there. They're still out of reach of any weapon system that's in the hands of the Ukrainians. Because when they talk about going 300 miles or 300 kilometers into Russia, that's 180 miles. Well, they're not right up against the border. In fact, with every day that passes, the Ukrainians are getting pushed farther and farther to the west, which means those systems that would fire the ATACMS or the Taurus or the Storm Shadow, they're also getting pushed farther back. So it means that Russia's actually right now in the process of creating that buffer zone they've talked about. And Ukraine's ability to mount an offensive it doesn't exist because they don't have air power. You cannot mount a counteroffensive that's going to push back a ground force without some effective air power, air defense, and artillery. Can't do it.
You can't. Not that it's hard. You can't. That's right. And that gets back to the word you used at the start of the show here, that almost everything he said here is just delusional or just not grounded in any kind of reality. And I want to ask you, like I said at the outset also, there's two sides. There's multiple sides to this equation. It's not just the Ukraine side, not just the NATO side, but there's also a Russian side to this. And when Biden says, we're going to support them for as long as it takes so we can get to a just peace. Of course, that very much depends on whose definition of just peace you're talking about here. But what occurs to me, and you're more tied into this than I am, so I'd like your view, especially since you were just in Russia and you talked to a number of people. When the Russian side hears this stuff, does it make them lose heart, or does it make them want to fight more hard?
Yeah, no, they double down. They just become more determined. They recognize now that there's no path for negotiation with the West, that the United States is not serious about negotiating. They're not serious about actually coming to the table and addressing what Russia has clearly stated are its desires over the last, now going on 16, 17 years at least, back to 2007, that Russia wants assurances that the West is not going to continue to expand NATO to the east. Well, we've done just the exact opposite. Russia wants assurances that there's not going to be Western military bases on Russia's borders. And Russia has ample reason to ask that, simply because in their history, they've been invaded at least four times in the last 200 years. And over the last 20 years have been direct targets of Western intelligence operations with Muslim insurgencies in the Chechen region that led to a bloody civil war in that area. So that's what they're looking for. And they don't see anybody in the West wanting to talk about that. So they've recognized they've got to fight to defend themselves. That's exactly what they're doing. And they did shift their rhetoric this past, a week ago, Monday. You and I talked when I was sitting atop that restaurant in St. Petersburg, that just 2 days before that, Vladimir Putin and then Foreign Minister Lavrov both said that the West was incurring a tremendous risk by pursuing this strategy of enabling Ukraine to strike inside of Russia. And so they don't believe in red lines, but they were sending a very clear message. It's the same you get when you're confronted with a skunk and that tail goes up, get away. Don't stand there, because that skunk's going to spray you. And what the Russians are saying, they're going to strike back. And when they strike, they're not going to pretend.
The statement you just said there, I think, is really sobering and troubling. The Russian side has concluded, and I think you used the past tense, there is no path to negotiate with the West. And if there's not, then there's only one avenue left. And ironically, John Mearsheimer, Professor Mearsheimer, was on our show, I think it was yesterday, came to very nearly that same conclusion. Watch how he put it.
I am not sure the Russians have an interest in shutting the war down anytime soon. The Russians now have the upper hand. I think the Ukrainian army is suffering greatly on the battlefield. And I think it's only a matter of time before the Russians push the Ukrainians back in a serious way and capture more territory. And I would think from a Russian point of view, it would be desirable to conquer a lot more territory than they now control, to position themselves for the future, because the Russians cannot be sure that Ukraine and the West, even if there is a ceasefire or some sort of settlement, will be content with that settlement and won't go back on the offensive sometime in the future. So if you're playing Russia's hand and you don't trust the West, you don't trust the Ukrainians, and you think that after a ceasefire is put in place, it may again turn into a hot war, you then have a vested interest in taking as much territory as possible now when you're strong and making sure that Ukraine is a truly dysfunctional rump state.
Do you see it any different?
Oh, no, not at all. I agree with John. I watched it yesterday. You're becoming must-watch television every day. So, but what's going on here is we can't just look at the last 2 years. Most Americans don't realize that since 2007, the United States has been conducting an annual military exercise with the Ukrainians in the Black Sea, with U.S. naval forces in the Black Sea and Marines that are landing on Ukrainian beaches. Now, the exercise is called Sea Breeze. It was canceled in 2007, I believe, or 2006, because of the Hezbollah Israeli dust up. But after that, it's gone on every year. And when you got Marines landing, the scenarios are described as counter piracy. I mean, cut me a break. It's a joke. All this is preparation to show how U.S. military forces would be used to go in and seize places like Odessa in order to thwart the Russians and take over Crimea. So the Russians have watched that year after year, year after year. They've been very patient about it. Can you imagine how we would react if Russia was doing that in Mexico since 2007? We would be crazed. We would be out of our minds. we would make that, we would be threatening Russia. The Russians haven't responded in the same way up until now.
Yeah,
and that's
so
what.
far.
Yeah, and that's where I think the West has confused their patience and tolerance with weakness.
And here, this may be. Tell me if this is what you're talking about a second ago. But here's what Putin has been saying about possibly losing some patience.
Мы думаем на тему о том, что если кто-то считает возможным поставлять такое оружие в зону боевых действий для нанесения ударов по нашей территории и создания проблем для нас, то почему у нас нет права поставлять наше оружие такого же класса в те регионы мира, где будут наноситься удары по чувствительным объектам тех стран, которые делают это в отношении России?
So so I mean, he's been seeing all this stuff that's been building up. It's not just, even over the last 6 months or so, not just since Biden authorized us to start firing weapons into Russian territory, however allegedly limited. But I can see that at some point, I mean, I think you said it, that Putin doesn't make empty threats, though he is patient on when he executes them.
Yeah, no, he's been very wise. I think, look, history's going to come back and record this era, the last 20 years. And I think Putin will be seen as a towering figure. He will be seen as a historic figure. And no, I'm not getting any money from the Russian government. Okay, the people, oh, you're just saying that because you're on their payroll. I'm not. Yeah, I wish I was on the payroll, that I was getting money, but I'm not. So, but it's a fact. He has avoided these provocations that other countries would have taken as an excuse to launch devastating military attacks. But I think Putin's seeing the big picture, because right now the way the situation is moving, it's not just militarily. Because if you look at it just in terms of Ukraine, yeah, Ukraine's losing. But take a broader picture. The United States' influence in the Middle East is going down the toilet. The United States' ability to confront China, it's going away. We're weaker. We couldn't sustain 2 weeks against the Chinese.
Yeah.
So all across the board, the U.S. military power is slipping. Hell, we can't even stop the Houthis, for God's sake. And we're gonna take on the Chinese and the Russians. We're having trouble dealing with the guys in sandals who are carrying daggers. I mean, come on.
It's ironic. I had Cyrus Jensen on this morning, and we were talking about the possible war with China, et cetera. And he made a similar comment. He said, wait a minute, you're telling me that the greatest American power in 20 years couldn't beat the Taliban in Afghanistan, and you're going to beat the Chinese in the Taiwan Straits? I mean, yeah, it's got a plausibility point there.
Well, and in fact, this is a little off topic, but it illustrates the problem. The spin coming out of the Pentagon is, hey, but the U.S. Army's on track to meet its recruiting goals. You know why it's on track to meet its recruiting goals? Because they dropped the goal by about 20,000. So that's like saying, hey, Danny, here's the benchmark for the physical fitness test. You've got to do 100 push-ups. Oh, you failed. Oh, but we now he's meeting it 100% because he only has to do 80. Well, okay. You can bullshit yourself that way, but it doesn't change the reality on the ground. You still can't do 100 push-ups, or you can't actually defeat the Houthis, or so America, wake up, for God's sake. This staring in the mirror, telling yourself that you're the most beautiful of all, and that nobody's bigger, better, more beautiful, stronger. It's a lie. Look in the mirror and see what is really there.
Yeah. Gary, I can see you down there. Do you have the ability to get that 60 minutes thing of Biden up? You know the one I'm talking about. Is it something you can get? Okay, yeah, let me know when you've got that up. Because
the United States of America, for God's sake, the most powerful nation in the history, not in the world, in the history of the world. The history of the world.
I think he believes that.
Yeah. He's not the only one. I mean, we could attribute his belief to his dementia, okay, his failing mental status. But unfortunately, there are members of Congress who are not as old as he is and not as, demented as he is, who actually believe the same nonsense. And They keep. I mean, look, even, and this is not a knock on Donald Trump, but Trump even says, "Oh, we got the best military in the world." No, we don't. We got quality people. We've got very patriotic people. We've got courageous people. I'm not in any way trying to smear
Absolutely.
or denigrate the service of the people who are there. But for God's sake, only 29% of our F-35s are combat operational. Okay? So, and that's not isolated. And it is across the board. The reason now they're saying that they can go with a lower recruitment target, oh, well, we're no longer going to worry about putting troops out there to do combat operations. We're going to have them focus on air defense. Oh, you're going on the defense. Okay, that makes sense. So stop kidding yourselves that we're down in terms of number of ships. When you compare the number of ships that were in the U.S. at the end of 1944 with what it is today,
somewhat different in the total number,
and yet
tonnage and everything else.
And yet we have more officers in the Navy, more senior officers, GOs, than we had in World War II. Think about that. So it's
and we had more American 4-star generals by a factor of 10 today than we did back in World War II. Just thought I'd throw that out there.
Yeah. I know that Doug McGregor has correctly noted that as one of the real problems. So we don't have the actual military capability to get into a fight and sustain it. And this is because I'm convinced most of the people that are making these decisions, they've never been in any kind of actual combat, physical, whether it's war or whether it's martial arts. Anybody that's got into a karate sparring match or a boxing match, you think 3 minutes is not a long time? Get out there and throw punches for 3 minutes. And you're going to learn that 3 minutes feels like 30 minutes. And you run out of gas. And so it's whoever's in the best shape and has the best capability. Well, what we're looking at right now is both Russia and China, by virtue of their geographic positions and in terms of their economy, their industrial capability, are far stronger than we are and more capable at being able to sustain if we get into actual combat. It's just, this isn't complicated. You don't have to be Clausewitz or Sun Tzu to figure this out.
You just have to be honest.
Yeah.
You have to be honest to be able to acknowledge what's there, what you can and what you can't do. And we don't seem to be doing that. And I want to jump real quick to something that Zelensky said during his comments during that press conference that we just watched here, which I think is going to probably will get derision from maybe you and I and when we listen to this, but I think it's like a red cape in front of a bull to Russia because they can't worry about whether he means it or not. But what he did say was that this package is going to help us, quote, win the war and will serve as a bridge to NATO membership. So all the things that started the war for Russia in the beginning, he's just dangling them out there and saying that's still our objective and that's still what we're trying to do, which again seems it's going to give Russia all the more incentive to not even worry about negotiated settlement, to try and win on the battlefield, because I don't know how else they can get their objectives.
Yeah. No, he's what he's facing at home. There's increasing reports about key members of his government are defecting, and that there's a movement afoot to bring Zaluzhny back. The general who was relieved and forced out by Zelensky. Zelensky does not have a strong political base anymore. That's shrinking. And yet he's got the full backing of the United States and NATO. And yet when you look at the backing of NATO, what you're looking at is Macron, who's calling snap elections in 2 weeks, Scholz, whose coalition just got clobbered in the recent European Parliament elections. Rishi Sunak, he's out too because they're having elections. It sounds like in England, leprosy is more popular than Rishi Sunak and his party. So, these are the guys that are backing Zelensky. They are as weak as Zelensky is politically right now. And it neglects the broader issue of no matter what you say, if the words that were expressed at the summit translated into combat, okay, yeah, they'd be a very powerful force, but it doesn't. It doesn't translate into the artillery and the FPVs, the first person, drones that are going in and attacking Ukrainian positions. That the reports are coming in every day of the Russians targeting command centers now and hitting them. They're taking out any aircraft and airfields that have had any planes on them whatsoever. And Ukraine doesn't have an ability to replace those. So it just, it becomes a numbers game. You can have all the heart in the world, but no matter how much heart you have, if your cars run out of gas, it ain't going to go anymore.
Yeah.
And that's what we're.
Right. Yeah. And it's like that image that Gary's showing right there. I mean, I don't care how brave the guys inside that room are. Once that drone goes in and blows up, that's the end. It's an end game. And that's happening all over Ukraine. And these ridiculous comments by President Biden, by President Zelensky, all it's going to do is get more people killed, and it's not going to do anything to reverse course. That's just the truth of it. All the stuff that people heard around the world today, it's all delusion, it's nonsense, and it's not going to go anywhere. I wish, Larry, that it was restricted to just the Ukraine war. That would only be bad. But instead, I think it's an illness that's really affecting all of our foreign policy. And before I let you go, I want to show you a couple of things here and this was also from today that Blinken was asked about a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war. And according to Blinken here, the fly in the ointment is Hamas. First, let me show you what he said, and then we'll talk about what's true.
The response we got was unfortunately not the yes that we were looking for, a yes that virtually the entire world has given. President Biden laid out this proposal for an immediate ceasefire, getting all the hostages home, putting us on a path to enduring peace in Gaza and beyond. And what you saw in the time since he put that out almost 2 weeks ago was country after country coming out and supporting it in the Arab world and well beyond. The Israelis reconfirmed their support for it. The United Nations Security Council, which rarely speaks with one voice these days, was almost unanimous in its support. So we were waiting for Hamas's response, and the response we got was to try to add new conditions to a proposal that everyone else had accepted. So we've got to see now if we can work through those.
Okay, two things just jumped right out at me. Number one, the Hamas actually, after that, they came out and said, what are you talking about? We did not say no. We didn't want to negotiate anything separately. So they flat called them out. And second, Israel did not say yes. They actually said no. So both of those things are just at surface level faulty, and it's not hard to find out.
Yeah, well, this is the Biden administration's playing to the domestic political audience in the United States and to the pro-Israeli crowd to show that, oh boy, Biden's doing everything they can to promote peace and to try to work out to stop the killing, but they're not, and it's just theater, because with any kind of genuine negotiation, you got to recognize the Hamas is not going to submit. I mean, unless they're actually defeated militarily. Israel's been going at it now for 8 months. They have failed to defeat Hamas. I mean, that's a fact. They've inflicted enormous damage. They've killed a lot of people. They've destroyed the infrastructure, but they haven't defeated Hamas. And I heard something this week, Danny, from two reliable sources. I can tell you offline who they were. But they've heard directly from IDF senior officers. IDF believes that they can launch air attacks into southern Lebanon that are going to decimate Hezbollah, defeat Hezbollah, and force Hezbollah to retreat north of the Litani River. And when I heard that, I told him, I said, guys, that's crazy. I mean, but they insist. That's what the IDF is talking about. So when the IDF decides to expand this war and go into southern Lebanon, the good news is Israel's going to lose. And why do I say that's good news? Because it's going to end up stopping the killing. Because Israel does not have the military force to sustain operations in southern Lebanon and to defeat Hezbollah, because Hezbollah in the intervening, I guess it's 18 years since the 2006 conflict, they've dug deeper tunnels, they've got better air defense, they've got better, more powerful weapons, and they have better trained troops. And what if Israel dares to do this, they're going to run into a buzzsaw that will could very well put in jeopardy the continued existence of this nation of Israel. I mean, it's
Right.
crazy.
Yeah,
But that's where we're headed.
The threat that was claimed that Hezbollah themselves could open up a northern front against Israel, I think was never very credible, because all the advantages would go to the IDF. If Lebanon left all these defensive positions they built and went on the offense, it would be a lot easier to kill. But if the reverse happens and Israel goes into there, because of all that, the decade, nearly 2 decades of time they've had to build those things up. I mean, you've seen it in Russia. What happens when Russia had about 8 months or 9 months to make defensive lines, how hard they were to penetrate. These things would be so much harder, and all the advantages would go to Hezbollah if Israel decides to do that. But right now, it looks to me like, even without knowing what you just told me, all the evidence I see makes it look like that's what Israel's going to do. And yet we seem oblivious to it.
Yeah, or we see it as a way that if that happens, it will get us involved with the conflict. And again, going back to history, you and I are old enough to remember 1983, when in the aftermath of the U.S. Shelling into the Baikal Valley, Imad Mughniya, who was in the early days of Hezbollah, blew up both the Marine barracks, as it was called, and the French barracks, as well as in the U.S. Embassy. So, the U.S. has meddled in there before and gotten its nose bloodied. And, this is, they're looking to escalate this, not de-escalate. And so that's why, and so when you put that in context of everything we were talking about with respect to Ukraine, again, we get to the resource issue. What can the United States credibly supply and sustain? And with as these weapon systems are used in combat, they're not being replaced at the same rate that they're being used. That's what people need to understand.
Yeah. And when you talk about credibility, so the last thing that I'd like your impression on, I don't know if you've seen this or not. When Gary first showed me, I just almost died, because I couldn't believe that these words were coming out of Secretary of State Blinken's mouth, which is saying something, because I can imagine a lot of bad things coming out. But when you hear this, tell me what you think.
What separates Israel, the United States, and other democracies when it comes to incredibly difficult situations like this is our respect for international law and, as appropriate, the laws of war. So we know that Israel will take all of the precautions that it can, just as we would. And again, that's what separates us from Hamas.
That's what separates us from everybody else.
Hey, tell that to the International Criminal Court. Hey, guys, remember all those threats of the United States that they're going to have you arrested, or they're going to come in and attack you because you had the audacity to try to enforce international law against the United States? Never mind. The United States is all thumbs up on that international law stuff. We're all behind it. Oh, and all those guys that we've been holding in Guantanamo for 24 years without any kind of actual recourse to any kind of international law and justice system. Never mind. We didn't mean it. We'll let them go. Please. The problem with this is our hypocrisy stinks, and we're not even good at it. Charles Dickens had a character called the Artful Dodger. Hey, if he was writing about Anthony Blinken, he'd call him the inartful liar. He's not even good at it.
Yeah. I mean, even our allies, I mean, they, at the best, they can roll their eyes at it, but at the worst, it just creates more anger toward the United States and just continues to destroy our credibility on almost any front here. And unfortunately, that's just where we are right now, and what we have to deal with.
Yeah. Ronald Reagan said that, some of the most terrifying words was, "I'm from the government, I'm here to help." Well, I think I would add another one to that. Hey, we're the United States, we got your back.
Oh man, that's chilling. Yeah, unfortunately,
Yeah.
that's true. Well, listen, Larry, thanks so much for coming on today and giving us these great insights. And because I know you got all kinds of sources all over the place and a lot of history on analyzing things. So really appreciate you coming on today.
Great. Thank you, Danny. Always a pleasure, man.
And for those who want more of Larry Johnson, go to his blog at sonar21.com, I believe it is. Is that the right address?
Yes, that's it.
Yeah. So, and he's all over the net. You can see him on a bunch of other shows too. But if you want to see more, go to his website there. Like we do. We also go there to check stuff out that he does as well. Thank you so much for joining us today. We want to let you know that tomorrow we're going to have our Intel brief, where we have the best of things that you may not have seen during this week and whatever new that happens between now and tomorrow afternoon. And we also have Colonel Jacques Beau back on again on Saturday, on the first day of this so-called peace negotiations that are going on, our peace process. It's happening in Switzerland. He'll be coming to us there to give him his take, who is from Switzerland. So he's got some really interesting insights. Both of those things are coming up, and we'll see you soon. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.